Today on CityCast Philly, it's been super hot this summer. We've seen temperatures above 90 degrees lately, and the humidity, don't even get me started, that makes it feel even more unbearable. Why is it so hot? And is weather like this going to be the new normal in Philly? I'm speaking with an award winning meteorologist who's been teaching me about weather trends most of my life. It's Monday, July 15th. I'm Trinae Nuri, and here's what Philly's talking about. Glenn Schwartz, award-winning meteorologist from the Philly region. Welcome to CityCast Philly.
All right, thanks a lot, Trinae.
Glenn, can I still call you Glenn Hurricane Schwartz?
Yeah. Yeah, people do. As a matter of fact, I think more people know the nickname than my real first name.
Well, also what stood out in your career on television are the bow ties, and you're still wearing the bow ties.
Yeah. Oh, this is a very special bow tie that I had made.
Ooh.
There's a thing called a global warming stripes. It's all over the world now. And we go back to the dark blues from like 1850, and the colors change as the atmosphere gets warmer. And so we're trying to let people know about these changes and how extreme they are. And these colors show it kind of dramatically.
And for our listeners who can't see the bow tie, one side is blue and the other is red, and those colors kind of meet in the middle and have like an ombre look to it. It's really cool. Glenn, you've been teaching me all about weather and climate change for decades on TV, from when to grab an umbrella or a jacket in the morning to the noticeable temperature trends. But I want to talk to you about this unbearable heat in Philly. Why is it getting so hot?
Well, we have a combination of effects. Now, it obviously gets hot in the summertime. And when I started at NBC 10 back in the mid 90s, we averaged about 24 days a summer where we hit 90 degrees. Now we average 30.
Mm.
This year, we're already to 20. So we're going to go way past 30. But what we're seeing, even this summer, as extreme as this summer is, it's nothing compared to what we're going to be seeing 10, 20, 30 years from now. So we can't even call this the new normal because it keeps changing.
Right.
So it's new normal for today. But 20 years from now, we're going to look back on 2024 as, wow, it was kind of comfortable that year.
I can't imagine this as being comfortable.
Yeah. And these changes are much more extreme in other parts of the world where we've been fortunate by comparison. You look at the Western United States, they're setting all kind of all-time records. And Las Vegas, for example, they just smashed their all-time high of 117 degrees. They got to 120 recently, and several days in a row over 115. When you get to a certain point, you're really threatening people's lives.
So basically, what I hear you saying is that Philly's climate has changed over the years and
Yep.
it's getting hotter.
Yeah, and it's not just what happens during the day. Yeah, the high temperatures are going up, but even more so, the nighttime temperatures are going up. And what happens, especially if you don't have air conditioning, is that there is less of an ability to cool off during the night. And that's where the studies have shown that you really get into the health dangers when you don't cool off at night.
Do you remember back in January when Philly broke its more than 700-day snow drought? That's obviously the winter months, but it kind of shows you just how warm our region was.
Yeah, and we're warming virtually every season. Some seasons are warming more than others, winter especially. And it's especially, again, happening at night. It doesn't get as cold, We haven't hit zero in Philadelphia, I think, since 1994. I mean, that's 30 years. So it's theoretically possible to get back down to zero, but it becomes less and less likely, less and less frequent.
Glenn, can you actually explain to me what does it mean when people use the term heat island effect? What
Mhm.
is that?
Yeah. Well, it's not just a uniform thing as the sun heats up the earth. It heats up land more than it heats up water, for example. So the oceans are not nearly as warm as the land. And then if you have, let's say, concrete versus grass, it's going to heat up more on the concrete. And more of the Philadelphia area, for example, is losing the grass that was around for thousands or millions of years, and as more and more building is taking place and the suburbs keep expanding, you get extra heat building up around the city. And it happens with every city. And it's called the urban heat island effect. And it's pretty significant. It's not just a couple of degrees. There are parts of Philadelphia that are, on average, 8, 9 degrees warmer on a hot day than parts of the suburbs. That's a huge number because if we just heat up the climate by a few degrees, we're making dramatic changes. And every city in the world that's growing has a heat island effect that is growing as well.
Well, what kinds of impacts does that have on us?
Well, the human body has a certain range where it's comfortable, and then there's a range where it gets to be dangerous. For example, our body temperature, let's say our average is 98.6. If we go up 2 degrees, we're sick. If we go up 5 degrees, we're hospitalized.
Right.
A little more than that, and you can't live. So there is a limited range that the human body can tolerate. And it's not like when it's cold, you can keep adding clothing. When it gets too hot, there's really not much that you can do, that your body even stops sweating at some point.
I want to talk about Philly more specifically. Do we know which Philly neighborhoods or parts of the region that are most impacted by this urban heat island effect?
Yeah, we do, even to a degree in each particular neighborhood. The company Climate Central, which is located in Princeton, has done some incredible research on this, and they make great graphics. They have maps for each city that show in different colors how much the heat island is. So you take Center City, obviously, that's going to be one of the hot spots.
Hmm.
All the way down to South Philly is a hot spot. You go up toward Kensington. Kensington is an extreme hot spot. And in many of these cases, the most extreme effect of the heat island is corresponding to the poorest parts of the city. And so there are more people that are affected and impacted by the extreme heat than others. You go into, let's say, the main line, there's much, much less of the heat island effect. I mean, it's hotter in the main line than it is, let's say, in central Pennsylvania, but it's not nearly as hot as it is in Kensington and other areas up I-95, even across the river in New Jersey, are affected severely by this heat island.
More on Philly's hot weather after the break. Glenn, as a professional forecaster, will Philly catch a break from these really hot summer days?
Well, it's not like it gets a little bit hotter each year. That's one of the difficult things about explaining climate change, that you might get a summer coming up that doesn't have a lot of 90-degree days. And then there'll be people that say, well, okay, the warming has stopped, or all we do is focus on our city and don't think about the rest of the world. So there are ups and downs, and there are different weather patterns each month and across each part of the earth. Now, it's all tied together, and the trend, of course, is to get hotter, average temperatures getting higher, more frequent extremes. The extreme heat breaks records. And so that trend is going to continue. But there will occasionally be cooler summers. There occasionally will be winters that have snowstorms in them. And that's the way it gets tricky to try to communicate about the climate threat, is because it's not just a gradual slope up every single day.
What concerns you most about this heat?
Well, as I said, at some point, the human body can't handle it. And it also leads to more drought. The hotter it is, there's more evaporation. And so the ground dries up more. And so people can be affected by drought. So one statistic here, okay, 30 million people are affected by extreme heat, an average of 85 degrees or more. 30 million. By 2070, that number is 2 billion. Okay, the number of people who are going to be vulnerable to health threats and even death from extreme heat is going to go up just exponentially. And what happens to those people? They're just going to sit there and take it? No, there's going to be mass migrations to try to protect themselves and their families to get into different parts of the world that aren't as hot. And so there are going to be fights over water. There's going to be fights over land, and you could eventually end up having wars fought over this climate change, because the humans are, we're meant to fight to survive. So it's going to cause a lot of societal problems and maybe even wars as a result of this.
Glenn, I mean, 2070 is far from now, but kind of not far from now. So,
That's right.
what can Philadelphians do right now to mitigate climate change?
So one of my lines is that there's nobody who can do everything, but everybody can do something. So, for example, I drive an electric vehicle. I never have to fill up with gas again. It's amazing cars, fast cars. I can charge it in my garage overnight. Other people have solar panels. There are government programs that actually help pay for that, where some people don't even have to pay at all to get that. What we're doing is trying to switch over to renewable energy as much as possible. If you're a Pico customer, for example, as I am, I can tell them I just want all of my energy from renewable sources. And they can do that. And a lot of people don't know about that. There are public transportation, more people using bicycles, carpooling. The whole mission is to throw less and less of that carbon dioxide up into the atmosphere. So, as I said, everybody can do something. One of the things that you can do is to support politicians who actually understand and accept this science and want to do something about it.
Well, Glenn, what do you say to critics of climate change?
Yeah, the critics who used to be called skeptics, back when I started in Philly in the 90s, um, are now called deniers, because you cannot scientifically deny the physics of the climate change. The bottom line is that the more carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases you put up in the atmosphere, the warmer the atmosphere is going to get. That is the science that we've known for hundreds of years. There's just absolutely no question about it. Now we have more and more information about hurricanes intensifying more quickly, of the earth warming, of the oceans warming, of there being more rain once you have rain. This is basic accepted science. And really, the only people who are arguing about this are arguing because of political reasons, not because of the science.
Last week on the show, we talked about ways we can actually beat the heat. So I've got to ask you, what ways do you stay cool?
Yeah. Well, for example, I went to the Phillies game against the Dodgers
Okay.
when it was well into the 90s. And I get affected by the heat. So what I did is I brought along a couple of bottles of water. You're allowed to bring in water as long as it's sealed and in a plastic bag, and little towels that I got from the playoffs last year. The Phillies gave out these
Yeah.
towels. So as I'm watching the game, I take out the towel and I pour some of the water on the towel, and then just go right around the back of the neck, which tends to be one of the places that heats up the most. And you could do it on top of your head. And you want to add moisture, because that leads to evaporation and that leads to cooling. Now, you're not going to cool off down to a comfortable level, but it'll be more tolerable if you do that. You take water breaks. You go into air conditioning occasionally. You go into the mall, go into a store every few hours, just to stop the continuous buildup of that heat. These are things that you can help. And apparently a lot of people did the right thing, because I didn't hear any kind of ambulance noises during the game. And that's always a good sign.
That's a good sign. How has observing the weather in Philly for more than 50 years impacted how you do meteorology?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I actually have altered my forecasting because the climate has changed. That's partly how personally I'm so convinced that the climate is not what it used to be. I observe the weather every day for the past 50 years, and that's my concentration. And so if I'm predicting rain, and I'm going to know that the same storm today is going to cause a lot more rain than that same storm 50 years ago. A lot more. And so I adjust the forecast itself. I adjust the way I talk about the forecast, because I've known that the atmosphere has changed. You have to look at what is happening and what has happened, and you can't just be closed minded when you're forecasting. I'm not afraid. I've never been afraid to predict a record. If the conditions are there, you have to predict it. I think that in general, we have to accept the fact that things are going to happen that never happened before, at least in recorded history.
That's meteorologist Glenn Hurricane Schwartz. Glenn, thank you so much for joining me on CityCast Philly.
All right. Thanks for having me.
If you want to learn more about the region's weather and climate changes, check out the links in our show notes. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. If you enjoyed this episode about how hot Philly's gonna get? Tell a friend. Rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter, Hey Philly, to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.